Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and we have now reached 2010 in our exploration of Asian horror films. We're going to cover just under 40 movies from this year, most of which I enjoyed, so it was a pretty good year. But first, we have some honorable mentions, of course. Quite a few of them, actually, for 2010. Now, these are all going to be Japanese films, unless I say otherwise. I highly recommend Confessions, an excellent drama-thriller hybrid, and Midnight FM, a great thriller from South Korea. Some other good ones are Gothic and Lolita Psycho, a cult action flick, A Night in Nude Salvation, which is kind of an atmospheric and erotic thriller, and Cold Fish, which is a dramatic thriller. Also, the live-action Gantz movie was released in 2010, but I thought it was kind of mediocre. I prefer the sequel, actually. A few others that I disliked were The Insight Mill, which is a lame thriller that takes place in one location, End of Animal, a quite boring Korean drama with some horror elements that are mixed in, and Outlaw, one of the absolute worst Korean thrillers I've ever seen. That movie is awful. But let's get started on these horror films, shall we? And as always, titles for all the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. So we begin, as we always do, with the worst Asian horror film from this year. But in the case of 2010, I do not think that there's one particular film that separated itself from the pack, in terms of being astronomically awful. But, you shouldn't misunderstand me, because we did have a handful of pretty poor films that were released during this year. But they are all kind of more or less equally incompetent. So it's really hard to pick one, So I really can't, in good conscience, just randomly pick one out of a hat, and give it this prestigious award that I give every year. So we're just going to do like a six-way tie. The first six films that I'm covering tonight are equally bad, basically. And the first of these is Womb Ghosts, a Hong Kong horror flick. Life after death of a fetus inside a woman's body exists as a womb ghost, of course. Unnatural termination of such life will turn the baby into the most evil and most vicious kind of spirit. Within a mental hospital that is haunted by spirits, a mysterious miscarriage of a young and beautiful inmate causes the authorities to investigate. Only one answer can be given to the existence of such an ungodly occurrence: the womb ghost. Alright, so this is a really incompetent attempted horror. I'd like to say more about the storyline, but to be honest, there's really nothing to describe. Some people get stalked by ghosts, and that's about it. There are numerous protagonists here, so it's not like you're restricted to one protagonist. Not a problem in and of itself, but none of them are developed properly, and there's no way for the viewer to really care about what's going to happen in this flick. The script writing is even worse, actually. It just kind of meanders around from person to person, never really bothers to expand on the underlying premise, which makes the horror elements feel kind of haphazard and sloppy. They just kind of happen. Speaking of the horror elements, the Chinese do borrow the Japanese Onryo ghost for this movie, oh yes. But when she appears, she will almost certainly provide chuckles or annoyance rather than fear. At one point, the ghost, I kid you not, this ghost floats around in circles above one of the protagonists, but the viewer will instantly notice that the filmmakers simply tied a harness around the girl and started swinging her around aimlessly. It almost looks like the ghost got caught on a ceiling fan and just started swinging around. That's probably the worst scene in the movie, but it gives an accurate representation of what this movie's like. I laughed during that scene, so yes. Most of the other attempts at humor are, they're pretty bad. Lots of cheap jump scares with loud noises. The kind of gimmicks that are used when filmmakers are just too lazy to think of anything else. But with that said, there are two fairly decent horror sequences to mention. In one scene, the ghost walks through a character and pulls his organs out, which, is pretty cool. But the way that it's executed was kind of awkward and funny too, but still entertaining scene. In another scene, the ghost rips open somebody's belly and crawls inside of her. So, there's a few pretty good scenes in this. In general, though, the scares are pretty lame, and there's no atmosphere at all to make up for it. The ending also uses like a form of supernatural deception that was used far more effectively over 40 years ago in the film Bakaneko, A Vengeful Spirit from 1968. That film had like better conflicts, better death scenes, and more effective atmosphere, so I would recommend you check that one out first, or instead of this. So if you have not seen Womb Ghosts, don't bother seeking it out. Now, Womb Ghosts it's moderately available on DVD and Blu-ray, but it is rather expensive, it looks like. At least the copies that I saw. Alright, next film here, we go to, I believe, mainland China. So we go from Hong Kong to mainland China. This one is called Curse of the Deserted. A novelist from Beijing named Guo published a very popular romantic ghost story called The Village. So after a group of college students hear about the story, they take off and try to find the location of the mysterious mansion mentioned in the book. They also hope to find out if the legend is true, if it speaks, because it speaks of a spirit called Rouge, who apparently curses couples who are not truly in love. So this guy tries to warn these kids, but they take themselves out there and they find themselves in more trouble than they could have imagined. So the author himself soon becomes plagued by a series of emails from someone calling herself Rouge. So all his stuff's going on here, and he feels like a curse has been passed to him, so he heads out to the village and tries to figure out what's going on. That's kind of a convoluted plot, and the film definitely doesn't really do it much justice in terms of any elements that might be at work here. The two lead actors in this are Sean Yu and Kitty Zhang, both of whom have given some very good performances in their careers, but they are both shackled by a completely incompetent script. I also put the word, I would put the word lead character in quotes because they don't really have as much screen time as they probably should as leads. Really, it's the younger actors who are given the reins during much of this film, and their performances are pretty run-of-the-mill. Their characters are pretty stupid, too. I'll give them that much. At one point, one of them hurts himself by playing with flashlights that have supernaturally magnetized themselves to a wooden ceiling, which results in him falling from a great height. So can you imagine just like walking around like this, I don't know what you would call it, almost like a big intersection of a building where there's like a stairwell and like railings, and there's a big open section where you could fall. So something supernatural happens, your big flashlights like fly out of your hands and hit the ceiling in the middle of this open area. So what do? Of course you crawl up the columns and try to grab the flashlights for no apparently good reason. And of course the supernatural magnetism miraculously fades away as you're in this vulnerable position and you fall like 4 stories down. Like, that's the type of scene that we're dealing with in this movie. It made no sense. But you also need to take into consideration that this is a mainland film, so the supernatural aspects are going to be downplayed, because, the government doesn't really like supernatural aspects too much in their films. But, not necessarily a problem, because there have been some very, very interesting mainstream horror films dealing with ghosts, or at least ghostly concepts. Films like Suffocation is one good example. That was more of a psychological horror than a ghost film. But it does pose a problem in Curse of the Deserted because there's too much dead weight and dull filler material that are added in an attempt to balance that out. So they can't really throw in like a ton of ghost scenes, so they just balance it out with some dull filler. It doesn't have enough of psychological content or storytelling to make it work either. I would say that there is one highlight in this movie, and that's the village itself. It's made almost entirely of stone and rock, so it gives an atmospheric environment, for sure. But unfortunately, it's only showcased a couple of times, usually near the beginning of the film, and then there's one scene near the end, I think. Filmmakers really blew their opportunity to take advantage of this, these locales that they had access to. So that's a big negative here, because this film definitely lacks atmosphere when they're not in those locations. So Obviously, I do not recommend Curse of the Deserted, and it is, just like Womb Ghosts, moderately available on DVD if you're somehow curious of that one. So our next movie has a title that is somewhat embarrassing to say. I guess it's not considered a swear word since I don't like to swear, but are you ready? Big Tits Zombie, also known as Big Tits Dragon, for no apparently good reason. A Japanese horror comedy. This is a stupid title for a stupid movie, unfortunately. So this opens with a stripper wielding a chainsaw and trying to escape a horde of zombies inside an abandoned spa resort. So, stuff happens. The film then cuts to several days earlier where this woman and one of her lady friends from the place begin to fend off some roaming zombies after they're basically working an unsuccessful strip club called Paradise Ikagawa Theater. So, things happen. I think what happens here is they discover a Book of the Dead, and things go bad to worse. Things go from bad to worse from there. So you have a little bit of that Evil Dead type of vibe. Well, I wouldn't even say vibe, because there's no Evil Dead vibe in this thing. But, the whole curse of or Book of the Dead that they introduced reminded me of Evil Dead, but that's really the only thing that reminded me of that movie from this. So long story short, it's just not good. It's not good. And one thing I thought of when I was watching this, and it's something I never think of. As a heterosexual male, I was practically offended by this movie. It's basically the Hooters of Japanese horror movies. What's wrong with Hooters, you might say? Well, let me tell you. Hooters is a restaurant, I don't even know if they're even in business anymore, but they're a restaurant that serves garbage food, but attracts men with its scantily clad women. Now, I have no problems with scantily clad women, but I do have a problem with the Hooters management who thinks that I'm stupid enough to eat their garbage food, you know what I'm saying, just because they trot out a bunch of hot chicks. I'm sorry, man. I'm not that easy. I'm not that easy. My standards for food are far higher than that. Even if I want bar food with hot chicks, take me to a place like Twin Peaks. At least Twin Peaks has decent bar food that's, that tastes pretty good. And you have the girls in the scantily clad lumberjack uniforms or whatever. But, it's just something I thought of for this movie. It's like, hey, look at us. We got scantily clad, Japanese girls, and sometimes they show their boobies. I need more than that in a film, man. I'm sorry. That's exactly what this movie is, man. It's the Hooters of frickin' Japanese horror films. Trots out some hot chicks and skimps out on everything else, There's no good horror, action, or zombies in this. So, too cheap and unambitious for my liking. It's not funny or atmospheric either, so it's tedious stuff. So this movie is widely available on DVD, unfortunately. You can skip it, though. Now, the next one here, again, we're still in that six-way movie tie. This one's pretty bad, too, man. And we're still in Japan. Death Tube. Now, a young man gets hooked on a website called DeathTube, which broadcasts actual murders in real time. Now, at first, he doesn't believe it's real, and I probably would feel the same way, until he is brought into the site itself, you know what I mean? So, I can't remember exactly what happened. I think he's kidnapped or something, so the killing game is about to begin here. So basically, you have these 8 people who are kidnapped and forced to compete in challenges to avoid getting murdered, which is a theme in Japanese horror cinema that we're going to see quite a bit here during the turn of the 2010s. Some films turned out better than others. The challenges themselves are simplistic, like a Rubik's Cube, for example, which is a kind of a good idea, but this film drops the ball in a number of areas. So first of all, the death scenes are a huge disappointment in this one. 1 or 2 pretty good kills early on just cannot make up for all the other lame ones. And I kid you not, there are way too many poisoning scenes in this movie. It seemed like at least half of the deaths were by poisoning. I mean, couldn't the filmmakers think of something more creative? I mean, come up with something else? That's a big problem for this film. Second huge problem is that almost every character is annoying. The protagonist, the antagonists, everyone. I don't remember one likable character in the entire film. In addition, the acting pretty much stinks across the board. It's bad, and the full 2-hour runtime does not feel justified either. So you have bad acting and the story drags. So people tend to get this movie, Death Tube, confused with a film called X Game, which was released in the same year and has the same overall premise, but that X Game movie is far better and more interesting than Death Tube. So don't get those mixed up. I think one reason for the confusion is that X Game has an alternate title on IMDb of Death Tube, so people are going to think it's the same movie. And I've seen it posted on streaming sites, maybe even it was on Netflix, as Death Tube instead of X Games. So there's all this confusion going on. Just make sure that if you want to watch one of the two, watch X Game, and I will cover that in a few videos from now. So, skip Death Tube, watch X Game. That's your lesson here. And Death Tube is, let's see here, it is widely available on DVD, man. I'm telling you. People who say, only the great foreign films end up getting released in the United States, we're not exposed to the bad stuff. That's why people think foreign films are better. Yeah, that's wrong. That is wrong. So our next one here. Our next one is I have some short thoughts on this because I barely remember it. And that is called Manhunting from Japan. So this is another one of those blind buys that simply did not work out well for me. Although I must say that most of my blind buys do turn out pretty well, this one did not. This one got me hooked based on its slasher premise, as I was in a slasher mood when buying it. Big mistake there. So a girl is basically kidnapped by a cloaked man, taken to a desolate woodland area, and then set free to be hunted to the death. Now, you may or may not remember the movie Surviving the Game with Ice-T and Rutger Hauer and Gary Busey that came out back in 1994, right around there. If you remember that one I thought was pretty good. It was kind of a B flick, but it kept moving, had plenty of B-grade thrills, some pretty good actors in there. I really need to rewatch that one again. I have not seen that one in at least 15 years. But I bring that up because this movie, Manhunting, has a similar premise, but it's far less entertaining. It's a lot... It's just really boring and uneventful. I mean, yeah, sure, there's some crossbow shooting and some panty shots at times, but there's also a lot of really dull filler material and not even one memorable moment. I really don't remember much of anything about this movie. So this is really a shoddy C-grade flick that seriously lacks excitement. You've probably never heard of it because it's so obscure. I think I just saw it on Yes Asia and I blind bought it from there. So, yeah, you can skip it. And Manhunting is, again, available on Region 2 DVD without subs. There's not a whole lot of talking in it anyway. All right, our next film here. So how many films do we have under our belt here? We have 5. So this is the 6th and final film that's in that 6-way tie for worst Asian horror film of the year. And that is Black Rat. 6 classmates receive an email from Asuka, who supposedly committed suicide years ago. Later that night, they all get together in a classroom and are surprised by a person wearing a bloody rat mask. The costumed rat quickly begins attacking them while screaming. Is this revenge for Asuka's death? Yeah, probably is. This movie stinks. Lazy, run-of-the-mill, and forgettable crap in just about every aspect. The characters, the story, the acting, the horror, the fighting scenes, etc. It's all crap. Of course, a few of the characters are annoying and grate on the nerves too, which is, typically the case in bad films such as this. Oh, and there's a question I have right off the bat. Within the first 10 minutes of this movie, I started asking myself this question. Why don't the protagonists, because there's a bunch of them, just attack the bad guy right at the beginning of the movie? She's standing right in front of them, and there's 5 or 6 of them. Just charge her and beat the crap out of her. I'm you could have ended the movie in the first 10 minutes. Yeah, not good. Now, from what I'm saying so far, you're probably thinking to yourself, man, this really sounds like it should have been awarded the worst Asian horror film from this year. But you're forgetting something, We have people wearing giant rat head outfits who go around killing people with baseball bats and other types of objects. So there is some level of marginal entertainment value in this, despite the bad execution overall. I really did kind of expect more from this particular director, Kenta Fukasaku, who previously gave us the entertaining film X-Cross from 2007, which I covered, which is way more entertaining than this. If you want to watch a Kenta Fukasaku film, go watch X-Cross. It's probably the best, or at least most, entertaining film in his filmography. And he's had a very inconsistent career so far. You know what I mean? He's definitely way behind his father in terms of quality filmmaking. But he did have a few good ones, and X-Cross is one of them. Black Rat is not. Black Rat is, unfortunately, widely available on DVD. Alright, so we shift back to a more obscure film again. And it's another blind buy. From Japan this time, not from Asia. And that is Monoroi, a Japanese horror anthology. So again, a disillusioned blind buy. But, I was on vacation in Japan, and the DVD cover art enticed me this time. So Manhunting got me with the premise. Monoroi got me with the cover art, and it looked pretty creepy. Now, this is not a terrible film. Remember, we have now passed the six-way tie for worst, horror film from this year in the Asian countries. But, just because this isn't a terrible film doesn't mean it's worth seeking out, and it is not. This is a made-for-television anthology with subpar quality that switches between mockumentary and dramatized events. So it kind of has a documentary-style feel to it at times. There's 3 stories: Hitori Kakurenbo, 13 Kaiden, and Oiran Buchi, that are each approximately 15 minutes in length. That's right. Even with the introductory segment, the running time is only 51 minutes long, so that's hardly the price for a higher Japanese movie tag. A lot of those Japanese Region 2 DVDs are, $30 a pop. Although I think I got this one discounted. I think I saw this one in the discount bin. So I got it with more of a deal, but still really wasn't worth it. The horror scenes are mostly lame. The acting is a bit weak at times, but I will say that the lighting is pretty good, and that does yield some decent moments of atmosphere. The first segment is the most interesting, as it focuses on the Japanese creepy hide-and-seek game that is played with ghosts when you're alone. However, we just recently covered the 2 films in the Hide-and-Go-Kill film series that executed that premise better anyways, so that's another reason really not to seek out Monoroi and just watch those if you're interested in that premise. I remember asking the concierge in my hotel to translate the title of the film, and she kind of giggled when she saw it. I found that amusing because almost every other time I've shown a Japanese person anything related to horror, they get the heebie-jeebies. I remember showing somebody, I had a little Onryo book of Onryo stories, and they were like, "Don't show me." No, don't show me. But with this one, Monoroi, she giggled. I don't know. It's not that bad of a movie, but it's just, I don't know, it's kind of forgettable. So Monoroi is available on Region 2 DVD, of course, without subs. Alright, so we have 4 films left, 2 from South Korea and 2 from Thailand. So let's crack into our first South Korean film of the night, and that is Bestseller, a horror thriller film. So I just rewatched this one, so I'm pretty sure of my opinions on this. A woman named Hee Soo has been a best-selling author for almost 20 years, but her reputation gets destroyed overnight when she is accused of plagiarizing one of her prior works. Battling depression and writer's block in the 2 years since, she accepts the suggestion of her longtime publisher friend to stay at a remote country home in a small rural town with her daughter, where she'll be able to rest in peace. Well, of course. Soon after arrival, of course, her daughter tells her mother that a mysterious invisible woman has been telling her stories, and the woman turns those fascinating stories into a new book. But after things do not turn out as planned, she sets out to uncover the truth and find out who her daughter was really talking to. Not exactly an original premise, right? How many times have we seen an author or a writer go to a secluded area only to meet something horrific? So it's no surprise, really, that the storyline, the plot twists, the suspense scenes, and the scoring are all somewhat generic in this. But that does not necessarily mean that the movie is automatically going to be bad, right? We've covered some films before in this playlist that have, easily overpowered their generic foundations with all kinds of advantages. But unfortunately, Bestseller does not offer anything of the sort. None of the scares are really that creative, memorable, or impactful. The mother-daughter relationship is kind of shallow, which really should be the bread and butter of a film like this. Some of the plot twists will kind of make you roll your eyes. And I thought the lead actress, Jung-hwa did not give a good performance. She definitely overacted in this. Not really a surprise again, because she's always been kind of hit or miss in her career. But there, on the positive side, there are a few good supporting actors here that I like that you'll notice and recognize. And some of the human-based thriller elements that are infused are pretty good. It does get a bit violent and uncomfortable during the second half. So, it does have a few merits to it, but overall I did not like this. Bestseller was a disappointment. It is available on Region 3 DVD with subtitles. Alright, our next film here, again from South Korea, is another one that kind of let me down a little bit. I was looking forward to this one. I'm a big fan of this format of horror film. That is the Haunted House Project, also known as Deserted House. So over the past 42 years, 6 people have gone missing, 8 people have died accidentally, and there have been 11 cases of murder that have occurred in a haunted, deserted house somewhere in Gyeonggi Province. The home is now banned for all persons to enter. However, 3 members of a club that explores abandoned houses and 3 staff members of a broadcasting company go to the deserted house. All of them disappear without a trace, but a video is left behind. I gotta tell you, this film's right up my frickin' alley. I love, well-executed found footage films like the Blair Witch Project. I really like that movie. I also really like, documentary-style stuff, stuff like Monoroi, The Curse. But, this one, the execution's off. But let's begin with a few positives here. The house itself is rather decrepit and spooky. The acting, pretty good. And there's a bit of suspense that is earned at times, although I'm kind of a sucker for the found footage type thing, so be wary of that. This particular house really is like a good setting for the film because it's so decrepit, and the film gets a little bit of mileage out of that. So good setting to choose. But unfortunately, there are just too many problems that cannot be overlooked here. For starters, the opening half is pretty freaking boring. It takes quite a while to get going. There's too much dull filler, not enough interesting backstory or mythology thrown in. Also, the camera work doesn't make any sense to me at times. I mean, from what I remember, it shifts between found footage and theatrical angles during some of the more important moments. Like, I don't understand why they were shifting in perspective like that. If you go found footage, you go found footage. You know what I mean? I don't know. It was kind of weird. There's also some intrusive music that is inserted. Felt distracting. Again, not sure I'm remembering all of that correctly since it's been quite a while since I've seen this, but those are things that kind of stuck out to me from memory. Also, the entire finale feels unfocused and sloppy as well. It does not crescendo into an intense sequence of legitimate scares. So, yeah, I do not recommend this one. A lot of people dislike it, and I can definitely understand why. Although it is available streaming on Amazon Instant, if you're interested. Alright. Now, we go and move to Thailand for our final 2 films of the evening. So we have Secret Sunday, also known as Nine Temples. At his mother's request, a young architect unwillingly takes a journey to visit 9 different temples in order to clean up his bad karma. Fortunately for him, he goes with his attractive girlfriend. Well, that's always a nice comfort. So this guy's mother had a disturbing dream about him previously, which prompted her to consult a monk. And that's apparently where she got the idea of sending him off on this pilgrimage of sorts. So the problem is that our protagonists begin to see horrifying visions while visiting these temples. So it's kind of an interesting premise. You can put some karmic spins on it and stuff like that. We have previously covered the film Shikoku during our exploration of 1999, which also based its premise off of the pilgrimage to temples. That film had enough positives going for it to justify a viewing, in my opinion. Secret Sunday is missing too much to recommend. The main problem with this movie is that there's no rhythm or flow to it. Stuff just kind of happens as this couple goes from temple to temple. You know, it's just like random types of ghosts flying in. It's just, I don't know, it just didn't feel like it had any type of consistency in terms of linking events to the main themes. You know, everyone's having visions of random things, like for no apparent reason. I still couldn't figure out, even after watching it again. I mean, eventually there are a few visions that foreshadow a decent ending, but everything else just feels like haphazard and chucked in. And, you know, like I said, it just doesn't cause problems for the horror imagery, but also the themes and the story overall, which really aren't all that well developed. Very difficult to become invested in anything that happens in this film because it never bothers to spend enough time on any one thing to develop it properly. On the positive side, the acting and direction are pretty good. There are certain moments that have the potential for some creepy or atmospheric flair, but even those scenes are hindered a little bit by some jump scares. So, yeah, I did not like this one. Some people do though. But Secret Sunday is available on Region 3 DVD. It might also be streaming on YouTube as well. All right, our final film of the night is Die a Violent Death, also known as Still in Tai Hong. Again, Thai horror anthology. So this is our final film tonight. I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. It's an anthology of 4 horror films, averaging about 25 minutes each. None of them are really worth watching, in my opinion, but overall, they're not really that bad either. You know, they're not bad enough to trash in a review. They're mostly just kind of mediocre, you know, and I barely remember them. But let's go through them very quickly. So, In Flame, the first segment, a man is haunted by regret and a ghost after he survives a nightclub fire that killed his girlfriend. So I found this one to be kind of sappy. It focuses on romantic regret and doesn't really do that concept well. Characters are weak, and the twist is even weaker. In Prison, the second segment, a prisoner begins to question his sanity after his roommate commits suicide. Run-of-the-mill stuff. In Revenge, the third segment, a deaf-mute drug dealer murders a woman thief in his apartment and makes the mistake of stashing her corpse in his apartment. The building's water duct system. So it's basically about, a drug sale gone wrong at the beginning. And it's also kind of disgusting at times in terms of how it focuses on contaminated water. Just watch Dark Water instead, really, The ghost girl does show up a few times here. Probably the best. I don't know why I'm saying this, I don't remember it. My notes say that this is probably the best story in this anthology, but that's not saying much. And then finally, in Haunted Motel, the fourth segment, an aging prostitute and his straight friend and a gay guy end up in a hotel owned by a crazy old lady and haunted by a lady killer. So the humor, this is a humorous film, is very ineffective overall. And it really hurts this because it's primarily a comedy with some horror elements spliced in. So, Die a Violent Death, just don't bother, I would say. Now, this one is available on YouTube under the name Still. Alright, so we mowed through some not-so-good movies tonight. Got through a lot of stuff. We're already finished with the Asian horror films from 2010 that I did not like, so that's good. So be sure to join me for part 2 of this video, and we'll get cracking on some of the more watchable titles. And as always, I will see you next time.